When Morris Carver pulled open the glass door of a corner diner in a town called Linden on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the first thing he saw was a yellow eviction notice taped to the inside of the window. The second thing he saw was the owner ignoring it completely while she carried a hot plate to a man who clearly could not pay for it. The diner was tiny. 8 stools, 4 booths, a counter worn pale where 40 years of elbows had rubbed it. A hand-painted sign hung crooked over the register, the letters done by somebody who cared more about the words than the lettering. The anybody plate. If you're hungry and you're short today, this one's on the house. No questions. Maurice was dressed plain. Gray hoodie, old jeans, no watch, no entourage. 3 championship rings in a safe a long way off. A net worth that did not fit on a single line. And a face that, in a town like Linden on a Tuesday, registered only as a big man looking for a late lunch. The owner, 30s, an apron tied twice around a frame that had gotten thin, a pencil holding up hair that hadn't had time to be done, set the plate in front of the man at the end of the counter and squeezed his shoulder. "Eat slow, Henry. There's more where that came from." Then she turned to Maurice with a real smile, the kind that costs something when your window has a yellow notice on it. "Sit anywhere, hun. Coffee's on whether you order or not." Behind her, 2 kids did homework in the last booth. The cook, an old man at the flat top, moved like every joint hurt. And the lockout date printed on the yellow notice in the window was 4 days away. And Maurice Carver sat down at the counter and said absolutely nothing. He ordered the meatloaf, and while he waited, he let his eyes move, the way they always did when a room had a story it hadn't told him yet. The first thing he noticed was the jar by the register, hand-labeled Anybody Plate Fund, with a few crumpled singles in it and a sign that said, "Take what you need to." A diner 4 days from closing, and the owner had left out a jar for people to take from. The second thing was the cook. He worked the flat top with the care of a man who'd done it 30 years. And Maurice watched the owner quietly slide her own tip money into the cook's apron pocket when she thought no one was looking. The third thing was a recipe card taped to the wall behind the counter. Laminated cloudy with age, the corners soft. He couldn't read it from his stool, but the handwriting on it pulled at something in him he couldn't name, the way a song you can't place pulls at you from another room. The fourth thing was a sound. The little bell over the door, and a man in an expensive coat coming in without taking it off, and the whole temperature of the diner dropping a few degrees. The owner's smile went careful. "Mr. Pruitt." The fifth thing was the way the older woman in the corner booth, 70-some, set down her fork and watched the man in the coat with the flat, steady eyes of someone who had seen his kind before. Maurice noticed every one of them. He did not react. He picked up his coffee and held still. Now, here is the part nobody in that diner understood yet. The big man at the counter had not wandered into Linden by accident. And what was about to happen in the next 20 minutes was not going to be the simple feel-good story that the kid filming it on his phone in the corner thought it was. Maurice Carver had walked into this exact diner, carrying a hole his whole life. And he was about to find out, on a gray Tuesday in a town he'd never heard of, that the kindest thing his mother ever did had been quietly feeding strangers for 25 years without anyone knowing where it came from, including him. What Maurice had no idea about, sitting on that worn stool, was one single fact written in a hand he would know anywhere. So stay with us for the whole video, because what this man ended up doing for the single mom who owned this diner did go viral, millions of views. But the reason behind it, the thing that connected a billionaire to a stranger's free meal sign, is going to stop you cold. Morris Carver grew up poor in Eaton Springs, raised by a small, iron-spined woman named Della, who cleaned other people's houses and came home with cracked hands and almost nothing, and gave a piece of that almost nothing away every chance she got. That was the thing people misunderstood about Della. She had less than everybody, and she fed everybody. There was always one more plate. The neighbor kids ate at her table. The man who slept behind the church got a sandwich pressed into his hands. When Maurice was 9 and complained once that they didn't have enough to be giving food to strangers, his mother stopped him with a look and a sentence he never forgot, a sentence she made him repeat back to her. "You feed anybody who's hungry, baby, and don't you ever ask their name." He asked her why once. She told him a story he half remembered now, about a winter when she was young and on her own, between homes, sitting in a bus station with a child and no money. And a stranger she never saw again bought her a hot meal and told her to do the same for somebody someday. Della had spent the rest of her life paying off a debt to a person whose name she never knew. She did it at bus stations. She did it at hospital waiting rooms. She did it for strangers in towns she passed through, all over, for decades. Quiet, leaving nothing behind but a full stomach, and sometimes, when someone wanted to thank her, wanted her recipe, wanted something, a card with a few lines of her cornbread and a few words of instruction in her looping, careful hand. Maurice became everything after that. 3 championships, an empire, more money than the whole town of Eaton Springs would see in a lifetime. His mother passed years ago, and he had spent a long time since wondering where all that quiet kindness of hers had gone. Whether a thing like that just evaporates when the person stops, or whether it keeps moving somewhere out in the world, in rooms he'd never see. He was about to find out it kept moving. Gordon Pruitt had not always been the man delivering eviction notices to single mothers. He was 55, a property developer, and he had grown up 2 streets over from poverty himself, close enough to smell it his whole childhood. He had clawed up out of it and built a portfolio, and somewhere on the climb, he had decided that the way you made sure you never went back was that you never, ever let yourself be sentimental about a building. A building was a number. A tenant was a number. The free meal sign in the window was, to Gordon, exactly the kind of soft thinking that had kept his own parents poor, and it irritated him in a way that went deeper than business. He had investors now. He'd promised them the corner, a chain coffee concept, reliable rent, no jar by the register. He'd lain awake the night before doing the math the way scared of going backward men do. The column of what he'd promised against the column of what this stubborn woman's lease was costing him in delay. And he'd decided to come in person and end it. He was not a monster. He was a frightened man who'd mistaken hardness for safety so long ago he'd forgotten it was a choice. And he had no idea who was sitting at the counter eating meatloaf while he did it. "Marisol," Gordon said, not lowering his voice for the room. 4 days. I came as a courtesy. You're going to want to start moving things out. The locks change Saturday morning, whether you've packed or not. Marisol Vega kept her chin level. Behind her, the teenage girl in the back booth, her daughter Lucia, 16, who came in after school every day to bus tables for free, went still over her homework. The little one, Diego, 9, looked up confused. Sal, the old cook, set down his spatula. "I asked for 30 days, Mr. Pruitt," Marisol said quietly. "I've got a fundraiser. I've got people who—" "You've got a free lunch sign and a tip jar people take from," Gordon said. "That's not a business. That's a hobby that's behind on rent." He glanced at the anybody plate sign and almost laughed. "You can't even feed yourself and you're feeding the whole street." In the corner, a college kid named Tyler had quietly turned his phone sideways and started recording. the way people do now when they feel a thing about to happen. And Maurice Carver set down his fork. But before you find out what he did, before this turns into the video that 40 million people would eventually watch, you need to understand what he had just seen on the wall behind Marisol's head. Because the calmest man in any room had just gone absolutely white. The recipe card, the cloudy laminate, the looping, careful hand. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The whole diner held its breath. Maurice stood up. He walked around the end of the counter, slowly, ignoring Gordon completely, and he stood in front of the laminated card on the wall and read it. Cornbread. A few lines of instruction. And at the bottom, the way she always signed the card she left behind for the people who asked. From somebody who was once hungry, too. He reached out and touched the edge of it. And when he turned around, his eyes were wet. And he asked Marisol a question that made no sense to anyone in the room. "Where did you get this card?" Marisol blinked. "My mother. When I was a little girl, we didn't have anywhere to live for a while. A bus station, mostly. And one night a woman bought us a hot meal, a stranger. And my mama tried to thank her, and the woman wouldn't take anything. She just wrote down her cornbread recipe and told my mama to feed anybody who was hungry someday and not to ask their name." Marisol's voice caught. "My mama lived on that. She told me that story my whole childhood. When I finally got this place, I put up the sign and the plate because of that woman. I never knew her name. That's the whole point of it. Don't ask the name." "That's my mother's handwriting," Maurice said. The diner went completely silent. That was the convergence the whole room had been standing inside without knowing it. The free meal sign. The jar. The whole reason a single mom 4 days from losing everything was still giving away plates she couldn't afford. It traced, across 25 years and 300 miles, back to one winter night in a bus station, back to a poor woman with cracked hands and one more plate to give, back to his mother. Della's kindness hadn't evaporated when she stopped. It had kept moving. It had built this diner. It had fed Henry his meatloaf 10 minutes ago. Maurice hadn't wandered in by accident at all. He'd walked straight into the far end of his own mother's life. "Della Carver," he said softly, to a woman who'd spent her whole life loving a stranger. "Her name was Della Carver. She was my mama. And you've been keeping her promise better than I have." Here is what he did, while Tyler's phone caught every second of it. He turned to Gordon Pruitt, and he did not destroy him. "I'm Maurice Carver," he said, and watched the developer's face change floor by floor. "I'm buying this building from you at fair market today, and I'm deeding it to her. And you're going to walk out of here having done one decent thing this year, which is more than most people manage. Take that. Most men don't get the chance to stop being who they've decided to be. I'm offering it to you for free." He set up the diner so it could never close. The building, the back rent, a fund for the anybody plate large enough to feed Lyndon for the rest of Marisol's life and her children's. He made Sal, the old cook who'd been working half-paid to keep a dying place alive, a part owner on the spot. He hugged Lucia, who'd bussed tables for free after school for 2 years. And he left the recipe card right where it was on the wall, because it belonged there. Miss Odessa, 73, who had watched the whole thing from her booth without a word, finally spoke. "I've eaten in this diner 11 years, she said, and I always wondered who that sign came from. Now we know. It came from somebody's mama who's still feeding us." His mother had told him, with cracked hands, in a kitchen with not enough in it. You feed anybody who's hungry, and don't you ever ask their name. She'd been doing it the whole time, everywhere, quietly, long after he stopped noticing. And so should you. Tyler posted the clip that night. By the next morning, it had 4 million views, and then 40, and people in the comments were crying about their own mothers, their own grandmothers, the strangers who'd fed them once when they were small and short and afraid. So look at what one gray Tuesday revealed. A developer who got handed away to stop being the man he'd hardened into. An old cook who kept a dying place alive on half pay and woke up an owner. A teenage girl who bussed tables for free and got seen. A single mom who'd spent her whole adult life honoring a stranger's kindness. 4 days from losing it all, who found out the stranger had a name and a son, and that the son had just walked through her door. And a man worth more than the whole town who came looking for a late lunch and found the far edge of his mother's life still glowing. She told him, "Don't ask the name." For 25 years, nobody did. And the kindness kept moving anyway. If somebody once fed you when you were hungry and never asked your name, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button, because it helps stories about quiet, traveling kindness reach the people who need them. And if you believe a good thing keeps moving long after the person who started it is gone, subscribe and join this community. There are more of us than you'd ever guess. And the plate is always full. Your next story is already waiting on your screen. We will see you there.